You know, sometimes we toss things in the fridge just out of habit. We think we're protecting the food, making it last longer. But after 60, even the little things like where we store a tomato can really affect how we feel. Let's look at what belongs in the fridge and what doesn't. When I bring up tomatoes in conversations about food storage, folks often look at me funny. Wait, aren't you supposed to refrigerate everything to keep it fresh? Well, not exactly. Tomatoes are one of those foods that seem harmless no matter where you put them. But in truth, chilling them does more harm than good, especially for us older adults. The cold messes with their texture, their flavor, and their nutrients. When a tomato goes into the fridge, its cell walls start to break down, and that's why it turns mealy or mushy. It loses that juicy, satisfying bite. But here's the bigger issue. Cold temperatures shut down a tomato's natural ripening process, and with that, its antioxidant content can take a dip. For folks in their 60s and beyond, those antioxidants aren't just a bonus. They're important for heart health, for fighting inflammation, and for supporting our immune systems. So yes, it matters more than you'd think. I remember learning this the hard way with one of my clients, Dorothy. She's 74, lives out in Arizona, and tends a lovely little backyard garden. She was proud of her homegrown tomatoes, but she always popped them straight into the fridge because that's what Mama used to do. We had a long chat one afternoon after she complained that her sandwiches just didn't taste the same anymore. She thought it was her taste buds fading with age. When I asked how she was storing her tomatoes, and she told me they were coming out of the fridge cold and bland, that's when the light bulb went off. I shared what I'd learned in my work, that refrigerating tomatoes damages their cell structure and steals their natural flavor. Dorothy gave it a try, kept them on a plate by the window instead. A week later, she called me, excited, saying, "I had the best tomato sandwich I've had in 10 years. It wasn't her taste buds, it was just the cold all along." And then, there was George, 68, from Michigan. He'd started buying those pre-packed tomatoes from the grocery store and storing them in the fridge to make them last longer. He didn't realize they were already chilled during transport. Keeping them cold at home only made them go bad faster and left them with a rubbery skin that bothered his dentures. We switched things up. He now lets them sit in a bowl on the counter out of direct sunlight. The change in texture made eating easier, and to him the tomatoes even tasted like they used to when he was a kid. What I found that really helps is simple. Just store tomatoes at room temperature, away from the sun. Don't crowd them in a bag or seal them in plastic. A shallow bowl, a paper towel underneath, and a spot on the counter is all they need. If you've got one that's getting a little too ripe, you can always eat it first or use it in a soup or sauce. But resist the urge to toss them in the fridge. I promise, it's worth it. You don't need fancy kitchen gadgets or complicated routines to take care of yourself. Sometimes it's just about giving a little thought to the basics. A juicy tomato full of flavor and nutrients can be a small reminder that simple things still bring joy. You deserve food that tastes like something, and that supports the strong, wise body you've carried all these years. I get it. You don't want it to mold, and tossing it in the fridge just feels like the safe thing to do. But here's what actually happens. Cold temperatures speed up the process called starch retrogradation. That's a fancy term for your bread goes stale faster. What's more, when bread gets cold, it dries out. The crust turns tough, the inside gets crumbly, and for many older folks, chewing becomes uncomfortable, especially if you've got dentures or sensitive gums. And when the bread's hard and dry, people tend to avoid eating it altogether or swallow pieces that haven't been chewed well, leading to digestion issues like bloating or discomfort. What seems like a small detail where you store your loaf can actually impact how comfortably you eat and how your body responds. Let me tell you about someone I've worked with named Harold. He's 81, lives alone in upstate New York, and still insists on doing all his grocery shopping himself. He told me one day that he couldn't enjoy sandwiches anymore because the bread was like cardboard. When I asked him how he stored it, he looked surprised. "In the fridge, of course," he said. I explained what I knew, that refrigerating bread dries it out faster than just leaving it on the counter. He was skeptical, but he tried keeping half the loaf in a bread box and freezing the rest in slices, taking out what he needed each day. After a week, he called to say his toast tasted like toast again, and lunch wasn't something he dreaded anymore. There's also Linda, 70, from California, who liked to buy fresh sourdough from the local market every weekend, but she noticed it would turn stale and rubbery within a couple of days. She'd been putting it straight into the fridge to keep it fresh. When I suggested she keep it in a paper bag on the counter for the first few days, then freeze whatever she wouldn't eat by day 4, it made a real difference. She could enjoy the texture she loved without rushing to eat the whole loaf in 2 days. It's not about eating faster, it's about storing smarter. One of the easiest ways to keep bread fresh is to store it at room temperature in a cool, dry place. Use a bread box if you have one, or a cloth bag or paper bag folded shut. If you live alone and don't go through a whole loaf quickly, slice the bread and freeze half of it. Pull out a slice or two as needed and let it thaw on the counter or toast it directly from frozen. That way every piece is as soft and fresh as the day you bought it, without the dryness the fridge brings. Taking care of yourself doesn't have to be big or difficult. Even something as simple as where you put your bread can change how you feel day to day. You've earned comfort, ease, and meals that bring a little joy. A soft slice of toast in the morning might seem like nothing, but it's one of those quiet pleasures that remind you still matter, every single day. You might not think much about tossing an onion into the fridge, especially if you've only used half and want to save the rest. But here's the thing, onions really don't do well in cold, moist environments. When stored in the refrigerator, they absorb moisture from the air, which softens their texture and encourages mold. That same dampness also pulls the sharpness right out of them, dulling their flavor and making them taste a little off. Plus, onions are like little sponges. They soak up smells and spread their own, turning your fridge into a strange mix of everything from yesterday's stew to today's yogurt. And if you've got a delicate digestive system, as many of us do with age, eating a cold, soggy onion can lead to heartburn, gas, or other discomfort. It's not just about flavor, it's about how your body handles it too. I remember this coming up with Margaret, a 76-year-old client of mine from Illinois. She kept her onions in the crisper drawer, thinking it would keep them fresher longer. But she started noticing a weird smell every time she opened the fridge. It wasn't strong, just this lingering, sour, sweet odor that seemed to cling to everything, especially her butter and berries. At first, she thought something had spoiled. But when we took a closer look together, we found it, an open bowl with a chopped red onion sitting uncovered right next to the eggs. Not only was the onion damp and slimy, but everything around it had picked up that smell. She laughed and said, "No wonder my cereal tastes funny." Then there was Robert, 67, who lives in Oregon and likes to cook chili every Sunday. He always kept a stash of onions in the fridge, whole ones, thinking it was the best way to make them last. But he was frustrated that they seemed to go bad so quickly, sprouting or getting mushy after a week. We talked about how whole onions need air circulation and how the fridge's humidity actually speeds up their decay. I suggested he switch to storing them in a mesh basket in a dark cupboard. A month later, he told me they were lasting twice as long, and his chili had that good strong bite again. What I've found works best is keeping whole onions in a cool, dry, well-ventilated place, like a pantry or cupboard away from direct light. Use a mesh bag or a basket, something that lets air flow around them. Once you cut into an onion, wrap the leftover piece in wax paper, or place it in an airtight container and store it in the fridge, but use it within a couple of days. Just don't store whole, uncut onions in the cold. They'll thank you by lasting longer and tasting better. There's something comforting about simple changes that make life easier. Choosing to store your onions the right way isn't just about the onions. It's about reclaiming those little everyday joys that remind you, you're not done learning, you're still making smart choices, and your comfort still counts. This one might come as a surprise, especially if you grew up in a time when folks kept eggs right on the kitchen counter without a second thought. But today, with how our food is processed and transported, refrigeration is key. Eggs in the US go through a washing process that removes the natural protective coating on the shell. Without that barrier, bacteria like salmonella can more easily sneak in. And when eggs sit at room temperature, especially for more than a couple of hours, the risk of contamination rises. For older adults whose immune systems might not respond as quickly or strongly, even a mild foodborne illness can lead to serious dehydration or fatigue. It's not about being overly cautious. It's about respecting how our bodies change and making small adjustments that keep us safe. One of my clients, Jim, he's 78 and lives in rural Kentucky, had always kept his eggs out. He said, "That's how Mama did it, and we never got sick." But a couple of summers ago, he had a nasty bout of food poisoning that landed him in the hospital. It took him weeks to fully bounce back. When we looked at his habits, the culprit wasn't the potato salad or the chicken. It was the eggs he'd cracked into his morning scramble. They'd been out on the counter for 3 days. He was shocked. "Never had trouble before," he said. And that's the thing, sometimes the rules change not because we got weaker, but because the environment's changed. Then there's Ethel, 69, from Florida. She was doing her best to eat more protein and had started having hard-boiled eggs for breakfast. She kept a bowl of them on the counter, thinking they were already cooked and safe. But after a few days, she noticed they smelled odd, and the texture felt off. When we talked about it, I explained that even cooked eggs should be refrigerated within 2 hours and eaten within a week. She laughed and said, "So much for my healthy routine." But after that, she made it part of her habit to label a container with the boil date and keep it chilled. Her mornings got smoother, and so did her digestion. What helps most, in my experience, is keeping your eggs in their original carton and placing them in the main body of the fridge, not the door. The door is the warmest part and fluctuates in temperature every time you open it. Inside the fridge, the eggs stay at a stable, cold temperature, which preserves their quality and safety. And if you hard-boil your eggs, go ahead and store them in a labeled container, just so you know when to use them by. Sometimes it's the tiniest habits that make the biggest difference. Just like putting on your seatbelt or locking the front door, keeping eggs cold is a quiet act of care. You're not just protecting your stomach, you're protecting your strength, your energy, your peace of mind. And that kind of care, it's never too late to give yourself more of it. It's easy to assume that if it comes in a bottle or box, it's shelf-stable. But the truth is, many of the things we rely on to support our health, like probiotics, liquid vitamins, insulin, or even certain eye drops, can lose their effectiveness if they're not stored properly. For older adults, that matters a great deal. Our bodies may not absorb nutrients or medications as efficiently as they used to, and that means we need every dose to count. Heat and light can break down delicate compounds, and if a product says, keep refrigerated or store in a cool place, that's not just a suggestion, it's essential. Otherwise, you might be taking something daily that's no longer doing its job, and you'd never even know it. I remember working with Gloria, 72, who lives in Southern California. She started taking a new probiotic after her doctor recommended it to help with digestion and bloating. She was diligent, took it every morning with breakfast, but kept saying, "I don't feel any different." When I asked where she stored the bottle, she said, "Oh, just next to the coffee pot." Well, that explained it. Her kitchen counter got warm, especially in the afternoons, and that kind of heat can kill off the live bacteria in probiotics. I suggested she keep it in the fridge instead. Within 2 weeks, she called and said, "You were right, I'm finally noticing a difference." It wasn't about changing the product, it was about giving it a fighting chance to work. Then there's Marvin, 80, from Georgia, who was prescribed insulin for his diabetes. His daughter noticed that his blood sugar readings were fluctuating, even though he was sticking to his meal plan and taking his shots on time. It turned out he'd been storing his insulin in the bathroom cabinet, thinking it was out of the way. But bathrooms can get warm and steamy, and insulin needs to be kept cool to stay effective. Once he switched to storing it on the top shelf of the fridge in a labeled box, his levels evened out, and he felt more confident managing his care. What tends to help is creating a cool zone in the refrigerator, maybe a small basket or a labeled section just for sensitive medications and supplements. Always read the label. If it says, refrigerate after opening, or keep at 36°F degree, take it seriously. Don't leave things like probiotics or liquid vitamins sitting out on the counter. A few extra seconds of care can make all the difference in how well your body responds. You're already doing so much to take care of yourself. You show up to doctor appointments, you ask questions, you try new routines, and that matters. Don't let a little thing like where you store a bottle undo all that effort. You deserve results that support your strength, your clarity, and your comfort. Sometimes all it takes is a cooler shelf and a reminder that your health is worth the space. Dairy products are some of the most sensitive foods we eat, especially after the age of 60. That's because our bodies process lactose more slowly, and our digestive systems can be more reactive to spoilage bacteria. Milk left out too long can develop harmful microbes that don't always change the smell right away, but can still lead to stomach cramps, nausea, or even food poisoning. Yogurt that sits too warm can separate and lose its probiotics. And soft cheeses, like cream cheese or ricotta, can become breeding grounds for bacteria if they're not kept cold. For older adults, foodborne illness isn't just uncomfortable. It can mean dehydration, weakness, and a trip to the hospital. And nobody wants that from something as simple as a bowl of cereal or a piece of toast with cheese. I'll never forget what happened with Irene, 77, from Ohio. She called me one morning in tears. She'd been up all night with stomach pain and felt dizzy and weak. At first, she thought it was something serious. But as we talked through what she'd eaten, we traced it back to a glass of milk she'd poured the evening before, then left on the counter to warm up a bit while she made a phone call. She got distracted, drank it later, and never thought twice. It hadn't smelled bad, but it had been sitting out for almost 2 hours. That was enough. Irene recovered after resting and drinking fluids, but she told me, "I never imagined one glass of milk could knock me down like that." And then there's Charlie, 69, from North Carolina. He liked to buy big tubs of plain yogurt and scoop, a little out each day. But he kept leaving the container out while he made his oatmeal, sometimes for 30-40 minutes. Over time, he noticed the yogurt started to look watery and smell slightly sour, even before the expiration date. We talked about it, and I explained that yogurt should go back in the fridge right after each use every time. Since then, he started taking just what he needed into a small bowl and putting the rest away right away. That small habit shift helped keep his stomach settled, and the yogurt lasted longer too. What usually works well is this: take only what you plan to eat and put the rest back in the fridge as soon as possible. Don't leave the milk jug on the table while you drink your coffee. Don't keep the cheese plate out all morning. If you're cooking with dairy, measure it out, then return it to the fridge before you even turn on the stove. It may feel like a lot of back and forth, but it becomes second nature, and it really does protect your health. Food should make you feel stronger, not weaker, and your comfort matters too much to gamble on something as easy to control as temperature. Keeping dairy cold isn't just a kitchen rule, it's a way of saying, I care about how I feel tomorrow. You've learned so much over the years, this is just one more quiet act of wisdom. A lot of us like to make extra rice, lentils, or beans to save time during the week. And that's a smart habit, but what many don't realize is that once these foods are cooked, they become highly perishable. When left at room temperature for more than an hour or two, especially in a warm kitchen, they can quickly grow harmful bacteria, even if they still look and smell fine. One of those bacteria, Bacillus cereus, is known to thrive in cooked rice and can cause food poisoning that starts with mild nausea, but can turn into vomiting, diarrhea, or worse. And for older adults, even mild symptoms can hit harder, causing fatigue, dehydration, or dizziness. It's one of those risks that hides in plain sight, right in that bowl you thought you'd just leave out for a bit. I once had a long chat with Thomas, 73, from Colorado, who had gotten into a great habit of cooking beans in bulk on Sundays. He'd leave the pot on the stove with the lid on and spoon out a serving whenever he was hungry. It made meals quick and easy, and he felt good about having something healthy always ready. But after a few months, he noticed he was feeling off a lot. More stomach cramps, low energy, trouble sleeping. At first, he thought it was just aging, but once we talked about how he was storing the beans, we figured it out. I explained how warm temperatures can let bacteria grow even when food still looks fine. He was surprised and a little upset. I thought I was doing everything right, he said. But once he started cooling the beans within an hour and transferring them into sealed containers in the fridge, the digestive issues cleared up within 2 weeks. It wasn't age, it was the bacteria. Another example is Marlene, 70, from New Mexico. She liked to make big batches of oatmeal and portion them into little bowls for the next few days, but one time she accidentally left the whole pot out overnight. She thought reheating it in the morning would kill any germs, but later that day she felt nauseous and couldn't keep her lunch down. She told me, "It looked fine. I had no idea it could make me sick." We talked about how reheating doesn't always kill all the bacteria once they've grown. Since then, she's become more careful about cooling and storing grains and hasn't had a single issue since. What I recommend is this. Once your grains or beans have cooled enough to touch comfortably, usually within an hour, transfer them to an airtight container and place them in the fridge. If you've made a large batch, divide it into smaller portions to help it cool faster. Never leave cooked grains or beans out for more than 2 hours, and when reheating, make sure they're steaming hot all the way through, not just lukewarm. Food. Safety might not be the most exciting topic, but it's one of those behind-the-scenes things that quietly supports your well-being. You've spent your life building habits that serve you. This is just one more small piece to add, an easy step with big impact. Because your energy, your comfort, your days, they matter more than ever. If this helped you rethink a kitchen habit or two, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss more tips that make a real difference. Remember, you're not alone, you're wiser than ever, and life still has beautiful flavors waiting for you.